Welcome back. So far, we've heard about how on Thursday, Jesus washed the disciples' feet before dinner. He did this to teach us how to be good leaders. Even the most important leaders must be willing to serve others. After that, Jesus sat down with the disciples and they ate supper together. During dinner, Jesus stood up and passed bread and wine around the table. He told the disciples that the bread was his body and that the wine was his blood. Every time we eat or drink, we should remember Jesus and what he did for us. Today, we're going to hear about what happened after the disciples had finished eating.
When all the food was eaten and only scraps were left on their plates, Jesus got up from the table again. He asked the disciples to come outside with him to pray. I always like going for a walk after dinner. It helps settle my tummy.
They walked for a bit until they got to a place just below the Mount of Olives. It was a garden called Gethsemane. They'd been there many times before to pray, so this wasn't too out of the ordinary. A little while after they arrived, Jesus took Peter, James, and John with him to a separate spot in the garden, away from the rest of the group.
It says in the Gospel of Mark that Jesus started to feel anxious and despair, probably because he knew how the rest of the night would unfold. He knew what was coming next.
Jesus asked Peter, James, and John to watch over him, keep guard, and pray.
Jesus then walked a little further away from them and knelt down to the ground to pray.
He was very upset because he knew this was his last night on this earth. He prayed really hard. He spoke to God and said, "Father, through you all things are possible. If it's possible, please take this cup of suffering away from me." Jesus was asking God to change the plan, to take away the pain and the death that was coming.
But Jesus didn't finish his prayer like that. Instead, he continued and said, "But Father, not my will, but yours will be done."
Jesus knew that even though he was scared, God had a plan, and that no matter what, he would keep following God's plan.
Then the scripture says God sent an angel down from heaven to give Jesus strength through this stressful time. After he finished praying, Jesus walked back to where his disciples were standing guard. But instead of being awake and alert, they were asleep.
They were asleep. They were fast asleep on the ground.
Jesus was pretty upset.
I mean, he knew what was coming. He was scared, and overall, he knew he would suffer for his friends.
But these guys couldn't even stay awake like he had asked them to.
Remember, in less than 24 hours, Jesus will have been arrested and put to death. But the disciples don't know that yet. Only Jesus knows. They don't understand how important it is for them to stay awake.
This is an important part of the Easter story because it shows us both sides of Jesus.
We know that Jesus is God's Son. He's divine and all-powerful.
But we also know that Jesus was human just like us, and he was scared.
He was both God and man at the same time. The God part of him was willing to die because of his great love, but the human part of him did not want to experience the great pain that he was surely going to suffer.
The human part of him was scared of being arrested, of pain, of death, all of it. He even asked if it was possible to back out of all of this.
But the God part was ready and willing to submit to the great rescue plan that was set in place, the plan that would defeat death once and for all.
This is something we need to remember too. God's got a plan, and sometimes it's scary and we're afraid. But we can remember that even as scared as Jesus was, he said yes to God's way. Jesus was God's perfect son and he was afraid, but he said, "Yes, let's do it your way, God."
Jesus shows us when we're afraid, we should pray and talk it out with God. He'll give us what we need to stay strong.